Welcome to the first video in the flipped endocrine module for AMP2. The idea here is for you to watch some short videos and possibly access some reference materials before you go to lab. After you've watched the videos, you'll take a pre-lab quiz. The pre-lab quiz is open in ELC. You'll have unlimited attempts, and the only requirement is that you continue to take the quiz until you get a 70% or better on the quiz. So I'm going to start here with some references that you might find useful. If you're interested in following along in the Saladin text, since we're going to be talking about the overview of the endocrine system, you might want to look for section 17.1. This is found on page 627 to 630, and that's in the textbook, the 8th edition of the textbook. If you're interested in accessing the lab manual by WISE, look for exercise 23, and you'll find this specifically the section that says anatomy of the major endocrine organs, and that's just really short, page 331 and 332. If you like the OpenStax textbook, I've put a link to the free OpenStax overview right here. So let's go ahead and get started. From the need to knows, the objective of this short video is to identify the classical endocrine glands on a model or a diagram. Now, I don't have any images of models here, so I'll be using a diagram. However, the torso models and the other models that we have in the lab are very, very clear. The organs that you are going to identify will be the thyroid and the parathyroid glands, the adrenal gland, the pancreas, and then the gonads, the testes and the ovaries. We have a separate video dedicated to the anterior and the posterior pituitary gland and their relationship to the hypothalamus. Additionally, we'll talk about the hormones that are produced by each of these endocrine glands, and we'll discuss the actions of each hormone. So we begin with this picture here. Then I actually got this from Wikimedia, the major endocrine glands. And these are classically the organs and glands that we think of as being part of the endocrine system. I do want to emphasize here that many organs secrete chemical messengers or hormones that they use to communicate with other organs or even with other organs in their own organ system. We are going to be focusing here just strictly on the classical endocrine glands. And we're going to start with the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland produces thyroid hormones, and we typically kind of lump these together. Sometimes we call them T3 or T4, triiodothyronine or thyroxine, or just thyroid hormones. And then another hormone that comes from the thyroid gland is actually calcitonin. Thyroid hormones affect most body cells. Their actions increase basal metabolic rate, and they regulate tissue growth and development. Thyroid hormones are critically important for nervous system development in children and babies. Calcitonin is important for calcium homeostasis. So calcitonin is released when calcium levels are high. This will inhibit the action of osteoclasts, and you may remember that osteoclasts are those bone cells that are responsible for the breakdown of bone tissue. And then additionally, calcitonin has the effect to inhibit calcium reabsorption from the kidney tubules. Both of these effects together will lead to a decrease in calcium in the plasma. And in fact, the stimulus for calcitonin release is an increase in calcium in the plasma. Okay, so the next gland we will talk about are the adrenal glands. These are paired glands. You can see them here. Sometimes they're called suprarenal glands because they sit on top of the kidneys here. And the adrenal glands actually are responsible for the production of several hormones, including cortisol, aldosterone, androgens, and then epinephrine and norepinephrine. And you may remember them from the discussion of the nervous system as neurotransmitters in the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. So we start with aldosterone. Aldosterone acts to increase the reabsorption and thereby water in the kidney tubules. We talk about aldosterone quite a bit in the cardiovascular system as a hormone that increases blood pressure and helps to regulate blood pressure. Aldosterone comes from a particular region of the adrenal cortex that I'll identify in just a second. Cortisol has wide-ranging effects on most body cells. This is sometimes called the stress hormone, and this hormone promotes the breakdown of fat and protein. Androgens are sex hormones, and these also have widespread effects on most tissues. We typically think of these androgens, and typically these are masculinizing hormones, as contributing to the development of some secondary sex characteristics. Now, what we see is that in the adrenal gland, in the adrenal cortex specifically, we have particular regions of the adrenal cortex, and from these particular regions, we see particular hormones being produced. Aldosterone comes from the outermost layer of the adrenal cortex called the zona glomerulosa. Cortisol comes from the middle region of the adrenal cortex called the zona fasciculata. And these androgens come from the deepest region of the adrenal cortex called the zona reticularis. And I want to make the point here that the adrenal cortex is separate from the adrenal medulla. The word cortex means bark. So the adrenal cortex is going to be the outermost region or the outermost layer of the adrenal glands, while the medulla is going to be the middle region. Let's go on. Oops. There we go. Okay. Now, from the parathyroid glands, we have parathyroid hormone. And the parathyroid glands are actually not seen here. They're actually located on the posterior aspect or the back side of the thyroid gland, and that's where they get their name. Parathyroid glands release parathyroid hormone, and parathyroid hormone acts opposite to calcitonin. So parathyroid hormone will be released in response to low levels of calcium in the plasma. And the action here are to stimulate osteoclasts and osteoblasts as well. You may remember that osteoclasts are those cells of the bone that are responsible for the breakdown of bone tissue. Additionally, parathyroid hormone will stimulate the reabsorption of calcium by the kidney tubules. These effects together serve to increase calcium in the plasma. And remember that the stimulus for parathyroid hormone is a decrease in calcium in the plasma. Okay. So the next organ that we'll talk about are the pancreas, which is very important. Two of the hormones that are released from the pancreas are hormones that you may have heard of before, insulin and glucagon. These come from the endocrine pancreas. I will just put a plug here for the exocrine pancreas, which are the cells that are responsible for the production of digestive hormones that are going to be released into the small intestine. Insulin is a hormone that acts on most body cells, and its action is to increase the uptake of glucose into these body cells. The net result of this is a reduction of glucose in the plasma. So some analogies will describe insulin as being kind of like a broom that sweeps glucose out of the plasma. Glucagon is the opposite number from insulin. Glucagon acts to increase glucose production and release from tissues like liver and adipose. And this means that glucagon's effect is to increase glucose in the plasma. So the stimulus then for insulin to be released would be an increase in glucose in the plasma, and a stimulus for glucagon release would be a decrease in glucose in the plasma. And insulin and glucagon are two of the hormones, actually, of a number of hormones that act together to promote the release, or to promote the regulation, of glucose in the plasma, which is very important. Okay. The last two organs that we'll talk about are the ovaries and the testes, and conveniently our person here happens to be of both sexes. The hormones that will be produced here will be our sex hormones, including estrogen and testosterone. Estrogens act on most tissues of the body, and as you're probably familiar with already, they promote the secondary sex characteristic development, so breast development and hip development, the redistribution of fat, all of those characteristics that become evident during puberty. Additionally, estrogens regulate the menstrual and ovarian cycles, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about reproduction. Testosterone also has widespread actions throughout the body and acts on most tissues. Like estrogens, testosterone promotes the development of secondary sex characteristics, so the deepening of the voice, increase in bone and muscle density, facial hair production. Testosterone also plays an important role in the production of sperm. So here we've discussed, we've given a quick overview of all of the classical endocrine glands and the organs that they produce. I've put on ELC a table that you can fill in, and each table has a place for you to identify the stimulus for the release, the target cells or the tissues that this hormone is acting on, and then the overall effects. Here and I've just divided it up according to the hormones that come from each gland, pancreatic hormones here, and then gonadal sex hormones. Okay, so we end here. Before you go to lab, make sure that you watch all the videos that are posted on ELC, and then don't forget to take the pre-lab quiz. Thanks so much for your time.